Let me now come to the first question and start with you, Paul. Uh, what is better business in your opinion? The economic system for business today is unstable. We are we are living beyond our planetary boundaries and have created tremendous inequalities. You have been saying that businesses have to take responsibility and not be the bystanders in a system that enables it to be. So, as per you, what does better business look like?
Yeah, no, thanks, Mahendra, for the opportunity, and Izumi for being here, obviously, and for what you're doing with the Asian Center. I think that is the most important thing first to get across, and I'm honored to be here with you. Your motivation shows if you meet on a Saturday when many other people do other things, you're talking the future of mankind. So we really appreciate that. Your question, what better business looks like, is a fairly easy one to answer right now, just having being in the midst of the COVID crisis. This year alone, World Overshoot Day was July 29th, which is the day that we use more resources that the world can replenish. Any day after that, we're actually stealing from future generations. What we've seen with COVID, for more than anything else, is that we cannot have healthy people on an unhealthy planet. And our economic model that continues to challenge the planetary boundaries, undermines them, if I may say, and creates an incredible level of inequality at a global scale, is simply not a sustainable model. I've said many times that any system where too many people feel they're not participating or they're excluded from, that system will ultimately rebel against itself. And I think you're starting to see that now. So what we're arguing in our book is that it's not enough anymore to just run CSR, which deals with being less bad, or even to think about circular economy or net zero targets, noble as they might be. We really have to start to think now regenerative, restorative, reparative, if you want to. That requires us to embed sustainability in the heart of the corporate strategy. And I believe that is now increasingly becoming a precondition for a successful company. We see that leading companies go beyond and are actually becoming systemic actors in driving even with their influence, with their power, with their reach, the broader transitional changes that society needs. So we would argue that for business to be successful long term, they would have to show that they have a net positive impact in this world, that they have to show that they make this a better world, and simply less bad is not good enough anymore. So that's the standard that we're advocating in our book. And frankly, if businesses cannot achieve that, we as citizens of this world simply have to ask the question, why should we support these businesses? So it's this regenerative future, it's this bigger outcome as a result of company strategies. The book itself talks about some of the hallmarks, if you want to, of these net positive companies.
So hold on for a while. We'll come to the book, and we'll ask you to talk a little bit more in detail because we are very keen to hear more about it.
Yeah.
So thank you. I think the regenerative future is bigger with the strategies of the company is a great message. And I think we're all alarmed with the fact that the Earth Overshoot Day in this year has already arrived in July, which means in the 7 months we have consumed the resources of planet Earth, which we were supposed to consume in 12 months period. So I'm sure the CEOs and the directors around the world who are listening to you from nearly 5 continents now, with the network of Asian Center and with the popularity of Mervyn King and Izumi and the Mervyn King's Academy, they will all take this great message home. With this, I request Izumi, over to you with your question.
Yes, Mr. Polman, you already mentioned slightly, but I think that many companies are working towards reducing the bad impact that they create. But your vision of the future is one of net positive. You slightly started to talk about that. Thank you. So tell us a little bit about this. And I understand this is also the title of your new book, Behind Your Screen. So would you please talk about some more details about the concept of the net positive?
Yeah, as I was mentioning before, what we talk about in the book about net positive is really businesses that improve the well-being for everyone, that it impacts at all scales. That means every product, every operation, every region, every country, and increasingly also every stakeholder, which are your employees, your suppliers, your communities, your customers, and I believe even future generations and the planet should increasingly be seen as stakeholders as well. The hallmarks for us of a net positive company are first and foremost the companies that take ownership of all of their impacts and consequences in this world, intended or not. Many companies are only focusing on scope 1 and scope 2, what is in their control. Many CEOs believe that if they outsource their value chain, they can also outsource their responsibility. We believe that doesn't work anymore. You have to take responsibility of your total impact in the world. In the case of Unilever, for example, if you're in the food business and there are issues of deforestation or stunting or food waste or poverty among smallholder farmers, you have to be part of the solution. The second thing for a net positive company is that they operate for the long-term benefit of business and society. Unfortunately, the Milton Friedman myopic focus on shareholder primacy is still the prevailing model in politics as much as in business, may I say. But really net positive companies that really address these worldly problems and see them as opportunities have to run a longer term model. And they have to, as a third characteristic, focus on all of the stakeholders. If by definition you run a long-term model for your businesses, you need to be sure that all of the people that contribute to the success see that they are benefiting from these business models. So optimizing the longer term multiple stakeholders. And then the next characteristic is that the shareholder primacy, if you want to, or the shareholder returns that come out this model is a result of what you do. Of course, we need profits to stay alive. Of course, we need returns. But we live for more. It's a result of what we do, not an objective. And finally, we would argue that the state of the world where we are and the challenges that we have to face, where we're way off track to delivering the Sustainable Development Goals, may I add, that the net positive companies actively participate in terms of driving the systems changes. First of all, we see very few companies still in this world making the clear commitments that are needed. Most CEOs at best stay within the law or are in CSR space, but some of the other ones are making targets more set on not to lose than frankly setting targets of what is needed to win. Few of the companies involved in broader coalitions to help governments and civil society to drive these broader changes. One of the reasons why you see that on the most important elements of the Sustainable Development, we are still way off track. You saw the IPCC report. In this decade, climate emissions go up 16%. We need to go down 45%. With COVID, we've seen 150 million people more in acute poverty, probably a slippage of 15 to 20 years on the Sustainable Development Goals. And that is true in every region of the world. So more than ever do we need these courageous net positive companies, and that actually starts with courageous leadership.
Thank you. Now it's very clear, but I think that maybe I want to ask some more about later. I just to give the Mahendra to question the another matters.
Thank you. So I think I do agree with you, Paul, that IPCC report, some of the conclusions are really, really very disturbing. And all of us collectively have to be quick in our action. And one powerful message that you gave, I'm sure, for the CEOs, that by outsourcing your supply chain, you do not outsource your responsibility.
Correct.
And so you have to be a part of the solution and think long term. So connected to that, my next question is about the short-termism. These days, we hear a lot about short-termism and the manner in which it is badly impacting our businesses. So how do we really fight the short-termism? what advice do you have for those that are focused on short-term results? And please also give your comments on shareholders versus stakeholders once again.
No, thanks, Mahendra. But one of the things that I talked about in the last answer is the need for leadership, and the behavior that we now see collectively clearly isn't up to the standards. Be it with politicians and the way multilateralism is developing, be it in populism, nationalism, or xenophobia, be it in undermining of democracy, which we have seen happen in many more countries since COVID. But the same is true in business. Business at scale is not assuming the responsibilities that they should. And it's not because people are bad people. I don't think there are CEOs who want more unemployment or air pollution or people going to bed hungry. They simply don't exist. Yet collectively, we don't behave the way we should. And this is because of our boundaries that are put upon us. The boundary of short-termism with the amount of money that we put in the financial markets is an incredible weight on the shoulders of the CEOs. Most of them have a tenure now of less than 4.5 years of these major companies. Because of short-termism, we've seen the lengths of a publicly traded company that they are alive go down from 67 years when I was born to 17 years now. We see the number of publicly traded companies dropping. It is very clear that some of these major issues that we have talked cannot be addressed by short-termism, nor is it clear, nor should it be clear to everybody that we cannot create value actually with short-termism. Most of the value creation in businesses happen 3 to 5 years out at least. When Unilever goes into China, it takes 10 years to have a business that gives you returns. When we build a factory, it takes 5 years. When you're in some businesses, these times might be even longer. So we need to create space for people to behave properly, and space for businesses actually to create value. And that discussion starts at the board level. Most of the CEOs would argue that the pressure is not necessarily only coming from the financial markets, but from their CEOs, from their boards, I apologize. And all too often we hear from many CEOs, even this week from one of the major banking CEOs, that all of the board meetings is about earnings per share for the quarter. Are we going to make it or not? Are we hitting our guidance? Are we satisfying the shareholders who are breathing in our necks? And that cannot be good for running a long-term business. In Unilever, we had to create a broad environment for people to behave right, as I mentioned. And the first thing I did was abolish quarterly reporting, stop giving guidance, and moving the compensation system to the longer term, which regretfully, I have to say, even today is still a fairly revolutionary system compared to most other companies. In fact, globally, if you look at all the big companies together, the average compensation for a CEO, even in their long-term plans, is 1.8 years. So in order to be moved to a longer-term business model, you have to, I think, first believe in the wanting to be a net positive company, in seeing this longer-term multi-stakeholder model with purpose at its core as also the best model long-term for your shareholders. To be a purposeful driven business, to get rid of these short-term pressures, you need to have a bigger goal than just satisfying the shareholders. Companies that have purpose at the core of their business tend to be run better, tend to be actually attract more people, more engaged people, better relationships with their suppliers and their value chains, their communities, and ultimately also more profitable. So to get rid of these short-term volatilities, you have to be strong. You have to be strong with your board, and you have to be strong as a leader in the companies itself. Now, what some of the tools we applied very quickly in Unilever is the first thing is you work on your governance. You have to make clear that the fiduciary duties to the companies, which is true in most jurisdictions, is actually to the long-term success of the company, not in beating the quarterly profits. You have to be sure that your incentive systems are aligned. In many cases, in many companies, the incentive systems, by the way, including in the financial market, are on beating the quarterly performance, the famous alphas, and you need to change these incentive systems to the longer term. You need to start an active engagement What we found in Unilever was that when we started to stop quarterly reporting and only move to twice a year, when we actively started explaining to our shareholders the longer term value creation model, we started to have different discussions, more strategic discussions that started to attract different shareholders. And over the 10 years, we saw a significant shift in our shareholder base to more longer term loyal shareholders as a result. And then obviously you have to put your strategy, your word where your mouth is. You have to have the courage to invest in some of these longer term things that don't give immediately a return, but that you know are successful a few years out. And you have to do that with clarity and consistency to the organization. And then last and not least, to support all of this, it would not surprise you, put the right metrics in place, the transparency that comes with it, and drive the accountability and responsibility. The main levels to work on are the CEOs themselves, their incentive systems, the quality of the CEO you hire, the space you give him. But even at the board level, we find that boards on the global level are frankly not as well placed to deal with these challenges as we would have liked to. Very few are climate competent, very few are ESG competent, and actually grew up in an old period of time when Milton Friedman was still ruling, but he's long been buried, in my opinion, in the graveyard of dinosaurs. So it's time that we also renovate the boards and bring in some fresh thinking. In your part of the world, one of the great examples has been set by, I believe, the Japanese pension fund when Hiro Mitsuno was still there. And I'm sure that Izumi knows him, where he decided, even with the Japanese pension fund, we're not going to lend our shares anymore for short selling. We're going to really invest in companies and forcing them to drive these longer term strategies. And you see Larry Fink doing the same. You see Vanguard coming in now, because they very well understand that it's not only about these short-term returns, it's about long-term returns for retirees and pensioners and all that. But more importantly, also, they need to be sure that they can actually retire in a world they can live in. And these two things have now become very, very closely related.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I think you're right. The letters by one of the world's largest institutional investor, Big Rock, Larry Fink, you mentioned, is really making impact. But I'm glad that many board of directors are listening to you in this roundtable. So the management led by CEO and the board led by chairman of these two, and particularly the chairman of the nomination and remuneration committee, if they get sensitized towards this long-term thinking and linking the performance with the long-term incentives and put their metrics right, I'm sure things are going to change. Thank you for that, Paul. Over to you, Izumi.
Yes, I think that's that you explained very clearly that what we have to do. And I think in theory, many of the corporate leaders understand what they have to do. And of course, that case of the GPIF and BlackRock creates a lot of the influence to the behavior of the company. And it's a change. But I think that though the many leaders understand in their mind, but it's really they struggling to take actions. Of course, that if they can have the board who fully understand and push the management to take actions. But I think that also there is not only the leader, but many organizations, the people in the organization, sometimes hard to change the way of behavior or the way of work. So how do you do large-scale transformation, not only for the relation between the shareholders, but the organization itself, especially the staff, and what is required for large-scale transformation so means in organization, and how they use the purpose work to move the organization?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And frankly, large-scale transformations are not easy. Many fail, actually. If you look at any of the articles written and published in the Harvard Business Reviews and the like, you see that 75% of these transformations fail. New CEOs coming in, standing on a soapbox, making big statements, and it doesn't work. And I think one of the main reasons, as you already alluded to, in your question, that they are often not fully integrated in both purpose and strategy. I don't believe you can do the large-scale transformations without having a purpose transformation. And Unilever, where the company was clearly off track when I came in, had seen its turnover decline in the previous decade, lost its mojo, had become victim of short-termism actually in the financial markets. We went back to the history of the company and went back to when Lord Lever started the company at the end of the 19th century, where he already was talking about shared prosperity. He didn't create the company to maximize shareholder return. He created the company to address the issues of hygiene in Victorian Britain, where 1 out of 2 babies didn't make it past year 1 either. So he invented Lifebuoy and Sunlight soap, and that was really his driver. He talked about a concept of shared prosperity, of being sure that all of the stakeholders would benefit. In fact, he built houses for his workers before his factory was running. He introduced pension plans and all the other things. So we went back to the core and started to enlighten that purpose. Now, as you cannot have sustainable companies without people being sustainable, you cannot have a purposeful driven company either without people finding their purpose. Because ultimately a company is a collection of people and individuals. I've always seen it as a living being in that sense. So we spent a lot of time, was fortunate enough with Bill George, who had written this book, True North, which I really enjoyed reading, to develop the purpose of our people. And it took us a year to do that. And then collectively, we developed the purpose of our company. So it starts really there. It also requires the CEOs and boards to make a commitment to run your business differently, to have a responsibility not only to your shareholders, but also a responsibility towards environmental stewardship and social equitable stewardship, if you want to, and make a commitment to integrate that in the company's strategies. It cannot be done otherwise. So before you actually work on a company transformation or a systems transformation, you need to focus on leadership transformation. And this is the element that is often missing. We rush too far into in our hierarchy structures, if you want to, into sending commands down the organization. But it takes courage, first and foremost, of the leaders to change. It takes courage to start to listen to all of your stakeholders. It takes courage to work with your stakeholders and make them part of your plans, because you're not totally in charge. You might hear some inconvenient truths. It takes courage to really go after what you really need to do in the world, not a minimum requirement you can meet. At Unilever, we set very audacious goals to reach 1 billion people improving their health and well-being, to be net zero already 10 years ago on climate, to have no waste in our factories, goals that we frankly, 100% sustainable sourcing, goals that we could never, ever achieve alone, but required partnership, required us to do things differently. So it starts with the leaders to be humble, to listen, to have a great level of empathy of what is going on in the world. And then it is a commitment to take responsibility, as we mentioned before. If you don't take responsibility of all the negative consequences in the world, you'll never do what is really needed. So the simple question you always have to answer is the world better off because you're in it or not? And once you've put the purpose at the core and worked the purpose with your people, then you need to set these absolute goals and targets and frankly make them clear. In Unilever, we set 50 goals. And people said, why so many? And what if you miss them? And is this really giving up your competitive advantage? No. Transparency builds trust, and trust is the basis of prosperity. And when we set these targets and worked with people, all different parts of society, the NGOs, governments, universities, our other stakeholders in the value chain, we saw our trust going up. We saw our circle of influence expand. We created more opportunities and outgrew our competitors year after year over the 10 years. And then obviously, I've talked about the need to change the boundaries. Too many people work in the forest. I think a real leader works on the forest. How can you create space? Just like we created the space on moving to the longer term. You install it in all of the systems, what you do. Consistency here is very important. You cannot say, I want to have a long-term business model, but then run your own pension fund investments on a short-term performance basis. You have to do it consistently in everything. And then you build in the feedback loops, the accountability, responsibility that I think most leaders understand. So it's hard to build these change programs, but many succeed. In your part of the world, for example, on the food collective was a new social enterprise I created. Imagine we work with a company, Olam, where Sonny Varghese is one of these incredible leaders who is completely transforming his business and reimagining how agriculture and food systems should work, moving to regenerative agriculture, landscape assessment, restoring soil health, working on the smallholder farmer livelihoods. These are major transformations that are happening in some of these companies there, but they only happen because the leaders are so strongly purpose driven and are fully consistent with what they say and what they do.
Thank you. It's very clear, but at the same time, I think we have to find out the right leader.
We are short of leaders and trees, Izumi. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
So right, you cannot transform, bring a large-scale transformation without transforming your purpose and without transforming the leadership. That's very, very important. Let's move on to the next important question that I have for you, Paul. What is courage? You have mentioned in your past 30 minutes different kind of responses about the courage. You often speak about courageous leadership. What are the hallmarks of a courageous leadership, and what does that mean today in a COVID climate stress world?
See, we deliberately put in our book, as you can see, how courageous companies thrive by giving more than they take. And the word courage is a carefully selected word. I've always liked that. We talk about moral leadership, we talk about sustainable leadership, we talk about conscious leadership, but actually courage comes from the French word cœur, which is heart. And what we have seen more than ever during COVID especially, that leaders that operate with a high sense of humility, humanity, show a high level of empathy or compassion, are able to work in these broader partnership, are strongly driven by a sense of purpose that we just talked about, think intergenerational, can understand these complexities of the world and boil them down to simplicity, i.e. system thinkers. Those are the leaders that have succeeded and actually their companies doing better. And those are the courageous leaders. They work with both their hearts and their heads. Frankly, one of the main issues, to simplify it a little bit, is that we've lost humanity in business. We've boiled down everything to spreadsheets, to numbers, to day trading, and we've lost the human side of businesses. So courageous leaders bring that humanity back, bring that purpose back, and put their companies to the service of the organization and of the world, if you want to. Ultimately, these leaders are, I always say, first requirement is to be a good human being, but more importantly, they understand the main driver of leadership, which is to put yourself to the service of others, knowing that by doing so, you're better off yourselves as well, and not be obsessed by self-centered greed. In fact, at the end of the day, the crises that we talk about of biodiversity loss, of climate change, of inequality, of food security, I don't think they are the real crises right now in society. In fact, we have the solutions. We've never been so forewarned, but also never been so forearmed with tools to do something about it. I think the real crisis is one of apathy, of greed, of selfishness that needs to be addressed. And this is what courageous leaders understand, and they live what they say. And obviously, as a result, they not only get a lot of following, they not only give a lot of energy to others, but they actually unlock energy that drives you to these incredible performances that we see these companies deliver.
Interesting. I particularly like your idea, this last one you said, that the real crisis is the crisis of greed and apathy. And though these days, I mean, this may sound philosophically. But I think now in business, unless the compassionate leadership really is practiced, and since you are from the uh, other part of the world, from Europe, I want to share. I don't know whether you have ever got a chance to read On Compassion by Dalai Lama. Some of the best treatise that I have been able to read is by Dalai Lama on compassion and compassionate leadership. So I think that's extremely, extremely important. Now we are at the fag end of our fireside chat, but I would like to give opportunity to some of our participants to ask a question. And I have a question here by one Dr. Bharti. She is the faculty in one of the public sector companies in India, which is called Hindustan Aeronautics Limited. And she is a faculty in Hindustan Aeronautics Limited's Management Academy. She asks a question that please share some insights on collaborative approaches towards accelerating sustainable development goals. Though you did touch upon this, but she specifically wants some bit more details on this.
Yeah, we can talk about the partnership. I wanted to come back to your point of the Dalai Lama, because I think one of the things the Dalai Lama said, and which is important in this discussion, in the references that you made, he said that if you seek enlightenment just for yourself to enhance your own causes, you actually miss purpose. But if you seek enlightenment to help others achieve their objectives, you are actually with purpose. And I think that's really the ultimate expression of what leadership is. For some, greed is good, but generosity always wins long term. And I've seen that over and over. So coming to the question of partnership here as well, when we developed the Sustainable Development Goals, and I had the opportunity to be part of the high-level panel developing these goals, we came to goal number 17, which is the foundation of all the Sustainable Development Goals, and we called it partnership. It wasn't a partnership meant to be a contractual between lawyers and you do this and I do that, but we only do if we both agree and we sign off. No, it was a partnership for humanity. It was a moral partnership where indeed we put the interest of the ones that were left behind up as a priority and made all the other interests of ourselves subservient to that. This is where the overall goal of the Sustainable Development Goals of not leaving anybody behind came from. So that part of a partnership is the most important thing to do. In our book, we talk about two things. We talk about 1 + 1 is 11, which is partnerships within your value chain, within your industry sector, easier to do. But then we talk the bigger systems change partnerships, which we call it takes 3 to tango, where a group of companies within an industry go together and actually work with civil society and others to help with governments to put the right frameworks in place, rules, laws, or regulations. In fact, to de-risk the political process. On the first partnership, 1 + 1 is 11, this is why we actually started to create Imagine. The CEOs in this world are held up to higher standards than they actually can deliver themselves. No CEO can solve the issues of plastics or lack of recycling by themselves. No CEO can solve the issues of deforestation or climate change by themselves. But collectively, they can do that. So with Imagine, we bring by industry sector a critical mass of CEOs across the value chain together. What we see is that collectively they become more courageous. We can attack issues across the value chain that are often not being handled because we think in silos. We can unlock quite some discontinuities. Because we have a critical mass of these companies, we attract people from civil society to join us, innovators and others. And then we work with governments to drive the broader systems changes. So that is a process of partnership that I would very much adhere to. We have put together, for example, 80 companies in the fashion industry, an important industry for Asia as well, which actually is a very destructive industry for our environment. We cannot achieve the Sustainable Development Goals if we don't convert fashion if we don't convert our food systems, if we don't change tourist and travel. And those are the industries that we're focused on. Collectively, we're moving to regenerative cotton, getting out of single use plastics, internalizing biodiversity in the heart of their business models, things that none of them could have done alone. Then you get to the broader things, which are the most important things, and really make you a net positive company. If you drive these broader systems changes, it takes three to tango, where all the US companies went together, for example, and the We Are Still In movement to convince the US to not go out of the Paris Agreement, where we created the Tropical Forest Alliance with all the companies working with governments to stop deforestation across the world, where you have the task force of financial disclosure on climate related risk, where you work with governments to influence that and put that into government policy, including prices on carbon. These are the more difficult partnerships, but they're absolutely needed. And businesses that actually participate in that, I think, have a higher standing of trust and respect in society. Just as society expects businesses to have increasingly opinions about some of these societal issues and speak out about it, they also expect businesses to be part of driving these broader systems changes. And frankly, it is fair to say that our political process is broken, that multilateralism is not quite working the way we had designed it. And whilst business has benefited for a long time from good governance and created this enormous wealth around the world for many people, when governance is under pressure, it is important for businesses to step up and fill that void. So that's the type of partnership that we now need. It also means making some tougher choices. And the book talks about that as well. It talks about the elephants in the room, the $3.5 billion in the US that still is in money that goes into lobbying. It's not the one vote, one person, one vote. It's one wallet, one vote. And that's not democracy. It talks about the obligation of tax, about fighting corruption, about saying one thing as a company and saying another thing via your trade association. I'm mentioning that deliberately because these are the elephants that need to be attacked as well, because ultimately these partnerships only work if there is trust, and trust only comes from that transparency and consistency we talked about. So as you embark on this, you also have to deal with some of these tougher choices that regretfully now many of the CEOs still don't want to embrace and own.
No, so thank you. That is the purpose of every year we conducting this SDG Asia Roundtables, Paul. I'm glad you mentioned about the SDG 17 Partnership for Goals, and I must tell you that the major message by our patron member Mervyn King, who is here, after whom we have named this Mervyn King Academy for Sustainable Development, he has emphasized on SDG 17 to strike multiple partnerships. And that's precisely we are doing it. We are striking partnership with, you said it takes three to tango. I would just build on that if civil society leaders, corporate leaders, and public leaders and the government leaders, all three of them get together, I think we would have a great music for the SDGs and the 7 billion people of this world. I see at this point in time, Mr. Amitabh Kant, the CEO of Niti Aayog, also has joined. Are you there, sir? Can you hear us? I just want to welcome you. Okay. Maybe his assistant has joined in and maybe he'll come a little later. So now we are almost getting to the end of this fireside chat. If Mervyn, do you have any observations? I mean, two doyens here, Mervyn King and Paul Polman, on the same stage, virtual room. Any observations, Mervyn?
Well, I agree with Paul that you've got the hallmark of the great leader is courage, because you're putting your personal reputation, your personal estate on the line. And leadership is an acceptance that the limited liability company that one is leading is an incapacitated artificial person that has no heart, no mind, no soul, and no conscience. You are the conscience of that company. And when something goes wrong, I made a speech in Australia, which was broadcast. There's never been a company that's done anything wrong. They're innocent. The same as an incapacitated person is innocent. It's its corporate leaders against whom the society's wrath should turn, because they haven't applied their minds to act in the best long-term interest of the health of this incapacitated person, which has become the most important citizen in the developing world, because it's a platform for raising capital and for creating jobs. And people often say that the society is the licensor of the company. But you go back to the middle of the 19th century, it was created by society for society. And it shouldn't have been used as an instrument just for profit and subsidized by society and the environment. And that was Friedman's thesis, which in fact collapsed. And now we've got sustainability. We've got two sides to that sustainability coin. And when Paul and I started on our missions 20, 30 years ago, we used to look at sustainability through the lens of the activities of the company and the product and the impact it has on the three critical dimensions identified by Brundtland, namely the economy, society, and the environment. But in the second decade of the 20th century, we had two very important events. We had the collapse of Lehman Brothers, and we had the GFC. And suddenly we as directors in business and thought leadership in this area saw that, in fact, those three critical pillars were having an impact on the limited liability company. It was impacting on its financial condition, its balance sheet. It was impacting on its operating performance, its income statement, its cash flow. It was impacting on its risk profile, its cost of capital. So sustainability is now seen on a double materiality basis. And I am fascinated by the EU, which has just passed its corporate sustainability reporting directives, which is based on double materiality, to do an objective assessment of the impact of the company on the world and the world's impact on the company. So you've got to be courageous to deal with all these things. And you've got to have, I believe, variable remuneration for your top leadership. And what I mean by that, you take those three critical dimensions and you incentivize your leaders on that basis. You say EBITDA, you're going to have a 1% increase. Well, if you improve that, you're going to get X, 1/3 of a sum. These were the adverse impacts on the environment during the year under review. Give me 5 things that you're going to work on in the year to eradicate or ameliorate those adverse impacts. These were the positive impacts. How are you going to enhance them in the next year? And you do the same thing with society now with the pandemic, health and safety regulations. And if they achieve all 3, well, then they can earn a lot of money. And it's much more palatable to stakeholders as well when you see that they've actually added value to society. And that's why inclusive capitalism has become so important. And you take account of the needs, interests, and expectations of stakeholders, but make decisions in the best long-term interest of the health of the company.
Well, thank you, Mervyn, for those comments. I fully agree with you. And I will not now take time to recapitulate what Paul talked about, but a couple of things, particularly the most important thing is leadership. And there's a crisis of greed and apathy. And we have to all collectively work together, not only the management and CEOs, but also the boards, to sensitize each one of them towards the urgency with which we have to work to accelerate these SDGs through several partnerships that we talked about. So, like, everything has to come to an end. Even this fireside chat has to come to an end. So thank you, Paul. Ladies and gentlemen, may I request you to kindly join me in giving a great applause to Mr. Paul Polman, who has inspired so many CEOs, continues to do so as he works for Imagine. Thank you very much, Paul, once again to you.
No, thank you, Isumi and Mahendra, for what you're doing. And it's always a pleasure to see Mervyn and listen to him as well. And I think one of the things he mentioned is the importance in evolving our accounting system now. And And he has been a great pioneer. So any support we can give to move that forward is an important part of what we've discussed today. Thanks for the opportunity. Most importantly, be safe and hopefully see you soon in person.
Thank you very much. And we look forward to work closely with Imagine, striking another partnership.
Likewise. Thank you all. Thanks.
Thank you.